Forgive me, YouTube, for I have sinned. I somehow said that Lenin was a Lutheran. No, his mother was a Lutheran. Lenin was baptized by the Russian Orthodox Church while having a Lutheran mother. Now, his mother only had a casual interest in the faith, but since his mother was a saint in his eyes, Lutheranism was an element in his upbringing, so my error was that I just didn't explain it properly, leading people to claim that I was flat out wrong or hadn't done my research. No, my error was that I didn't explain it properly. However, there were more criticisms besides this, and I don't think any of the others stand up to scrutiny. If I remember, I'll put timestamps in the description so that you can see the specific criticisms I'll be addressing, but first I want to read this particular comment and my response to it because I think it's an important one. You couldn't express more truth. I had quite a hard childhood with an absent and psychologically violent father and an extremely loving but destroyed mother. Despite good student abilities, I had to struggle a lot against myself to go further. My rebel instinct, and even time has passed and I started my own company now. I still struggle terribly against my laziness and lack of discipline. Fortunately, I'm good in what I do, but it's an everyday struggle. The refusal of my well-being not to betray my victimal mother against my capitalist father is still present as a reflex in my everyday life. I'm seeing a therapist to keep my life together, but your conclusions helped me a lot more today than an hour I spent from 7 PM to 8 PM with him. Thank you, Tik, you're awesome. And I said, there's a book called The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden that you may want to check out. It has helped me personally, and by the sounds of it, I think you will get something from it too. A lot of psychology has been based on the works of Freud and Jung, both of whom were Hermeticists. Thus, in my opinion, and it is just an opinion, a lot of therapists are ill-equipped to deal with real-life issues. It therefore falls upon our shoulders to do the majority of the work to figure ourselves out. For me personally, I have found the works of Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff's books on objectivism extremely helpful, even if at first it doesn't seem like they should be. The negative stigma they have delayed me from looking into them, and I regret that. There's no point in building a house on sand. You've got to have a good philosophical foundation, otherwise it's a fruitless endeavour. I wanted to read that because there was a lot of comments like this, and we are talking about childhood upbringings and how that influenced people in their adulthood, so it's worth talking about it. I also wanted to provide the knowledge of Jung and Freud being Hermeticists, which explains why a lot of psychology is just totally off the mark, and also give the recommendation of Branden's book on self-esteem. I'm still working my way through it, but it's been good so far, so if anyone is struggling with self-esteem, you may want to check this out. There was this comment as well. I'm seeing a scary amount of parallels with my own life. Abusive absent father, altruistic, and believing I wasn't worth it. Forced to become a baker in a traumatizing work environment in order to support my siblings. I honestly don't know how I stopped myself from going down that path. I eventually had enough space to resume studying. I got a career and love working. I think a bit of it has to do with my response to the feminist part of our culture. Even though I am trans, I was still always taught to be ashamed of myself for being born male. Like I was a monster by default, even though I had done nothing. You will benefit from reading Brendan's book on self-esteem, and also Leonard Peikoff's book, The Cause of Hitler's Germany. It will explain to you why you had to be shamed. Your concept of self had to be destroyed in order to make room for faith. But what's interesting about this is that people were saying I was wrong, and yet other people in the comments were bringing up their own personal experiences and telling me I was spot on. So while I admit that more work needs to be done on this subject, I think we're onto something here. That said, it's on to the criticism now. We'll start with some of the simple ones, including the silly criticism that basically denied everything that we were hearing. They said that there is no pattern, or that I had no evidence to support my claims, even though I obviously did use evidence. I had references at the bottom of the screen, and I also didn't just make up the pattern. If you read about these people, you'll see that they all have a very similar upbringing. From what I can tell from online sources, Che Guevara also fits the bill, as does Fidel Castro, and others. And yet, these people just dismiss me. It's almost as if they didn't want to see the pattern for their own personal reasons, and so dismissed it without giving it a fair consideration. And I think the question then becomes, why? Have these people had traumatic upbringings? Did the topic bring up memories that they would not rather have? There's a definite pattern of people on my channel refusing to consider certain ideas, and I've always found that fascinating. I understand that people have different interests, and I don't expect people to always agree. But this isn't that. Denying or dismissing the identified pattern as simply being nonsense is a very strange thing in my opinion. People then said that I am wrong because parental issues aren't a sufficient answer. They said that the problem of parental issues by itself doesn't explain these people. Or they argued that many people have parental problems and that not all of them became socialists or mass murderers. And I think in this instance, my critics have missed the point. It's not that parental issues by itself, in isolation, is the cause, but rather that parental issues combined with an altruistic morality system, a self-hatred, and an inability to turn to religion for salvation is the problem. It's not one thing in isolation, but the whole lot of it put together. Let's put it another way. You need eggs, milk, and flour to make a cake. No, Tik, you're wrong. Eggs by themselves don't make a cake. Yes, I know, eggs by themselves don't make a cake. You need all the ingredients combined in order to make a cake. And similarly, parental issues by themselves don't make a socialist. You need all the ingredients combined in order to get them. And that's why a clearly defined pattern was evident. Every single critic who said that parental issues weren't a sufficient explanation isolated the one issue of parental issues from all the other factors and ignored the wider context. I'm not sure why they did that, but they did, and again, it was really bizarre in my opinion. Then again, perhaps there was a reason. As this person said, everyone has parental issues. I see that you have some real socialists in your comments section. And this could be it. Maybe I'm holding up the mirror and people don't like the reflection. Anyway, some were dismissing the pattern I've identified, but then saying that it was simply mental illness that is the cause. Well, it's been a while, so I think it's worth playing it for old time's sake. It's the Madman Hitler card. If you don't understand someone else's behaviour or point of view, just call them insane and don't bother to understand their reasoning or how they came to their conclusions. I get called mentally ill all the time by my critics, and the reason why is because they don't understand any of my views. They've not listened. They're not listening. And they're just jumping to stupid conclusions. Well, if these people can't accurately understand me, what chance have they got with National Socialism, Fascism or Marxism? Rather than understand why these socialists came to their views, they just throw out the Madman Hitler card and say they must be mentally ill. Well, it may look like a mental illness from someone else's perspective, but as an ex-socialist myself, I can tell you that there is a logic to the socialist faith. If you've not been a socialist, it can be difficult to understand it, and I've struggled to convey this view to my friend Axiom, who was never a socialist, but it does make sense. Maybe I need a dedicated video on trying to explain how a socialist sees the world, to a non-socialist. Maybe that's something I can do, but there is a logic there. But I don't think mental illness is enough by itself. I'm not saying there was no mental illness or that it doesn't look like mental illness. but that mental illness is probably a symptom, not the cause. The lives of the socialists I showed all had a loss of faith and parental issues, an altruistic morality, and a rebellious streak manifesting as a fear of independence, laziness, and a desire to be taken care of. They then lashed out at the world for not being the type of world where they could mope around all day doing nothing. That may look like mental illness from an outsider's perspective, but we can logically see the pattern that made them come to that conclusion. So at worst, mental illness is a symptom, not the cause. To be honest, I think you're an excellent historian, but a terrible psychologist. The common denominator I found with socialists is narcissistic personality disorder. Every socialist, from the useful idiots and tankies on 4chan and Reddit to Mao and Stalin, seems to be very narcissistic. In fact, socialism itself seems to be a narcissistic pathology codified into a Gnostic theology. Right, maybe they do have narcissistic personality disorder, but what caused it? Could it not be that their altruistic upbringing, coupled with parental issues and all the other factors identified in the pattern, led to a narcissistic personality disorder? Or is narcissistic personality disorder the cause of all that? Again, as an ex-socialist who still has low self-esteem, hence why I bought Brandon's book, I don't think narcissism is correct. It may look like narcissism to outsiders, but I think it would be a symptom, not a cause. Another criticism was that Lutheranism wasn't to blame. People thought that I was attacking Lutheranism specifically because the first 4 socialists in the video were Lutherans. But I wasn't. Mao and Pol Pot were Buddhists, not Christians. And others on the list weren't Lutheran either. It's just a bit of a funny coincidence that the first 4 were from a Lutheran background, while Lenin being a mixture of Lutheran and Eastern Orthodox. I think it's actually nothing to do with a specific religion. And, if you got offended by my supposed attack on Lutheranism, you've identified demons that don't exist. This leads us to the criticism that everyone was religious back then, so religion doesn't explain it. The problem with that is that due to the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution, as well as the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the concept of liberty and free markets, we actually see a loss of faith in the traditional religions. Even if people didn't become atheists, religion started to lose its grip on people's outlook and lives. And in this instance, every single one of these socialists lost their faith in the mainstream religions and became atheists, supposedly. I say supposedly because socialism is itself a religion, but they didn't seem to realise this and class themselves as atheists. So the criticism that says, well, everyone was religious back then, so religion can't explain it, has missed the point that it was the loss of faith in the mainstream religion that was the factor being discussed, not the fact that everyone was religious. And this leads to our discussion about altruism and Christianity specifically. So, the pattern I identified said that these people started off in a mainstream religion, but then, due to parental issues and poor schooling, had a rebellious nature and lost their faith in the mainstream religion. However, they retained the altruistic morality that they had adopted from the mainstream religion, and took that into the faith of socialism. Well, to counter this, some Christians argued that Christianity isn't about altruism or self-sacrifice. And I've got to say that when I read that, I was absolutely astonished that Christians would make this argument. Of course, we know why they now were making this argument. They're wrongly perceiving my video as an attack on Christianity, which it wasn't. And so they defended it by accusing me of not knowing what Christian doctrine is. But this is a tactical blunder on their part, not least because I wasn't attacking Christianity at all, but also because there's no denying that altruism or self-sacrifice is inherent within the faith. Charity is a virtue, is it not? You must devote your entire life to God, do you not? These are the manifestations of altruism and self-sacrifice. Let's read from a Christian website that discusses this issue. Service to others is a pillar of Christianity. Well, that's it then. Done. End of discussion. But of course they won't be satisfied with this, so let's continue. Jesus taught that helping those in need was one of the most important aspects of life for just about anyone. Jesus went as far as to suggest that people should help others as much as possible. For example, Jesus praised those who would give so much to the poor that they themselves became poor. With such strong emphasis on helping till it hurts in the New Testament, one would expect to see Christians today putting altruism, or producing a positive change in the world, at the forefront of their lives. For whatever reason, this is seldom the case. The level of philanthropy and volunteerism among Christians is approximately the same as among secular people. Christians today focus on other aspects of following Christ, such as attending church and gaining converts, while often dismissing Christ's teachings that each of us should put in a major effort to help our fellow humans. Why is this so? And then it goes on to discuss this, which I'm not going to get into. But here's another website that references the Bible saying the same thing. What does the Bible say about altruism? Altruism is an unselfish concern for the welfare of others. An altruistic person gives generously of time and resources for no personal gain, and often at personal risk. A major theme of the Bible is godly altruism. As far back as the Mosaic Law, the Bible records God's desire that his people care for the widows, the orphans, and the poor in their communities. And here's some Bible passages. In the New Testament, James 1:27 says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Altruism is taught throughout scriptures in a variety of ways. First, God commanded that his people love your neighbour as yourself. Then, Jesus modelled altruism during his years on earth. And the New Testament writers echoed that theme by urging Christians to do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Paul explained that Christians must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good, in order to provide for urgent needs and not live unproductive lives. And it keeps going. So to say that there's no altruism or self-sacrifice in the Christian faith is, quite frankly, a baffling assertion. And it was Christians making this point. However, I can see why there's a misunderstanding here, as this commenter said. Christianity doesn't actually include the denigration of the self, but more of an equal consideration. After all, it is love thy neighbour as thyself, and not love him more than you do yourself. No, let me read that passage again. Regard one another as more important than yourselves. Regard one another as more important than yourselves. That's a very clear instruction in the Bible. There's also just a whole lot that's directly incompatible with the ideas of secular altruism too. Like, you're not supposed to compel people to give, but if you don't, you'll go to hell. And you should be quiet as you give to charity, or you'll burn in eternal fire. And as somebody else said in response, the Bible has conflicting instructions. There is the golden rule, but then there are other passages where it does go full altruist and teaches extreme self-loathing. But the critics say that there's no self-loathing or self-hatred in Christianity. Yet I'm not the only one to identify it. We'll come back to this shortly. However, sticking to this point, you might say, well, okay, there's altruism in there, but there's no self-sacrifice. Well, let's just read these comments. Judaism's attitude to altruism isn't the same as Christianity. While charity is encouraged, self-immolation for the sake of others is forbidden. The person responding said, it's also forbidden in actual Christianity. Unfortunately, Tik, as good as he is, hasn't studied the subject enough. I have studied it, and I do understand it, so Let me clarify for you. As Ayn Rand points out, to be fully altruistic, you must offer yourself up as a meal to the cannibals, like a sacrificial animal, led like a lamb to the slaughter in silence and shame. However, while Christianity is the attempt at making altruism a reality, the authors of the Bible realized that it was unrealistic to expect their followers to be fully altruistic, since they themselves couldn't live that way. People need to eat. You can't give away all your food to charity, otherwise you would starve. So this is where the contradictions start. Christianity is built upon altruism, but they had to place limits upon it. They say, yes, you must sacrifice for others, but only up to a point. And what they did was they put an artificial limit on the altruist doctrine. The idea became that you would only eat just enough to sustain yourself and no more. Then you would give the rest to others. It wasn't that Christianity doesn't encourage guilt, altruism or self-sacrifice, but rather that these elements are tempered by the idea of a loving God, and that once removed from that loving God, they become unbearable. And that is precisely my point. A Christian is taught to feel guilt and shame, is taught to be altruistic and self-sacrificial, but only to a point, because the love of God and Jesus will save you. However, if someone who was Christian loses the faith, that love of God and Jesus goes away. So you're left with the guilt, the shame, the altruism, and the self-sacrificial elements without any way of your sins being forgiven. The only solution, therefore, is for society to become your new God, and that's precisely where socialism comes in. The revolution is Judgment Day, and the communist utopia is Heaven on Earth, hence the title of one of the books that I've been reading. But this is where yet another criticism came in. Christians, specifically Catholics, were arguing that Christianity is not about self-hatred. Well, the central idea of Christianity is that, by their nature, men are flawed, evil, sinful creatures who, if left to their own devices, would devour each other like a swarm of rats. These people are, by default, destined to go to hell. However, there is a saviour figure, Jesus Christ, who dies on the cross for your sins, for yourself. Therefore, your inherent sinful nature will be forgiven. Not overcome, just forgiven, if you put your faith in Jesus, at which point you will go to heaven. So, self-hatred is there, right in the middle of it all. This is the fundamental element at the heart of the doctrine of Christianity, and denying that is simply impossible. If it wasn't about self-hatred, you would not need to be saved. Like, think about it. What are you being saved from? You're being saved from yourself. If you did not hate yourself and believe that you were a bad, sinful person, you would have no reason to need Jesus. The original sin is that you are inherently a bad person. From Christianity.com. In essence, we are born with a sinful nature because of Adam. From our infancy, we have a tendency to choose selfishness and our own interests over the interests of others. The original sin of Adam has caused every human to be born with original sin, except for Jesus, who was born of a virgin. Although we may say, that's not fair, if I was in Adam's shoes I wouldn't have sinned, but I think we can analyse our own actions in life and understand we probably would have messed up in a similar way to what he did. What are the consequences of original sin? According to St. George Greek Orthodox Cathedral, one of the first consequences was that they, Adam and Eve, became embarrassed, that they were naked and they covered themselves with fig leaves. They were no longer focused on God, but were now self-centered in their bodies. Their soul was no longer in communion with God, their bodily appetites took charge, and they became ashamed because of their lack of clothing. They began the passionate earthly life that we all now participate in. Mankind still had the image of God, but it was now tarnished or dimmed. Their bodies became subject to sickness, corruption, and death. The garden with the tree of life was no longer accessible for them. This is the status we inherit from Adam and Eve. This is what we call ancestral sin. We do not obtain the blame for the bad choice that Adam made, but we inherit the consequence of his sinfulness, the change in nature he underwent. Since we are all descendants of Adam and Eve, we all acquire their sinful nature that resulted from the fall. So we are inherently bad. We are not good. And implicit in this is a self-hatred, a self-loathing. But the Christian doctrine says Jesus saves us from this self-hatred. Biblically speaking, we know we are sinners who are separated from God. There is a standard that we will have failed to live up to and will never be able to live up to on our own. Apart from God, we are without hope. But this is not cause to hate ourselves. Oh really, this sentence is in there? Because that's what people are doing. They realize that they have original sin. They therefore conclude a self-hatred. And the authors are responding to that conclusion by saying, no, it's not cause to hate ourselves. Rather, it is cause to turn to God and rely on his grace. He has made a way to salvation. God created humanity in his image, he loves us, and we reflect him. Though sin marred his image, God did not abandon us. Instead, he sent his son Jesus, who, though remaining fully God, took on human's flesh. Jesus lived a perfect life. He then died to pay the penalty for our sin, and he rose again to prove his victory over sin and death. All who put their faith in him are saved. This is cause for great rejoicing. When we become a redeemed child of God, there is no reason to hate ourselves. Yes, but here's the problem. If you lose your faith, but retain the altruism, you can no longer be saved. You're left with self-hatred and no way to get out of it. This was the point I was trying to make. My critics took my video as an attack upon Christianity, specifically Lutheranism, but they missed the mark here. I made it clear that the loss of faith, emphasis on loss, left these people who had parental issues with an altruistic morality system with no way to save themselves from self-hatred. Every single one of these socialists was brought up in a religious household or school or monastery and subsequently lost the faith. It's the loss of faith, but the retention of the altruistic morality and self-hatred that is important. This is why it applies to Mao and Pol Pot as well, even though they're not Christian. But let's just back up a second. Adam and Eve sinned and fell from God's grace. They were no longer focused on God, but were self-centered in their bodies, that were hungry and began a passionate earthly life, and covered themselves in material things to protect their nakedness. They were corrupt, sick, and could succumb to death, and this was the ancestral sin. So we once lived in communion with God, communism with God, but we sinned and descended into several stages of history where we ended up in capitalism. But don't worry, the revolution will come and we will once again be able to get to communism with God. Oh wait, it's Marxism! Now, just like some Christians argued that Christianity wasn't altruist, others argued that socialists are not altruists either. Many of these people were saying that socialists are narcissists, not altruists. So let me read from one of these comments. None of the socialist leaders were altruistic. Altruism is voluntarily being in the service of others. It does not mean hating the material world, and it does not involve force. I would argue that they had a God complex and wanted to force a bad version of altruism on everybody else. They were self-serving to the core. Well, as I replied to him, you cannot be a socialist without being altruistic. Socialism requires altruism, since the equality principle is based upon it. Altruism is all about helping others. The question is, why are others in need of help? Because the system, capitalism, is bad. Material reality does not provide equality, and thus material reality is bad, and we must overcome it by coming together and helping our fellow men via the collective, the state. Thus, altruism is against material reality, nature, and the free market. This is the reason they blame others, like you said. They think that men who are left to their own devices will devour each other like a swarm of rats. Therefore, other men are the problem in their eyes. That's why they call for a socialist new man. It's also why they're happy to murder people that they think are not altruistic. If you're not working towards society, you're against it, and therefore evil. Selfishness is evil in their eyes because they don't see how self-interest actually benefits other people. They assume that the selfish person is against society, and thus they are justified in killing them. This is the crucial point that people need to understand. The mass murders committed in the 20th century were done in the name of society, supposedly for the benefit of society. By murdering the selfish, greedy, sinful people, you're left with the good people. Those that remain will be the altruists who, now no longer shackled under the chains of selfish capitalism, will be able to form a new utopian society where we'll all help each other and are equal. We will all be in communion with God. Think about what all the socialists say they want. Minimum wages, a social safety net, universal basic income, healthcare that's free universal at the point of need. They say you've got to contribute to society. You've got to give to others, which is the most altruistic phrase you can possibly come up with. And they're not joking when they say this stuff. They do genuinely want to help others. But they see people who stand in their way as being selfish, evil sinners who must be purged in order for their perfect society to be realised. Capitalists are, therefore, devils. Free market people are demons. And in the National Socialist sense, the Jews were seen as devils and rats. They want to purge these people to clean up society. The evil that socialists do is done for altruistic reasons. So to say that they're not altruistic is a fundamental misunderstanding of what's going on here. It's poor people who become powerful who want to take the riches and spread the wealth without a true appreciation of how money works. These people are not being altruistic. You're not altruistic when it's not your money. No, it is. Money is the root of all evil, is it not? Money prevents equality. For the altruist, money is the problem. You hoarding money is selfish. If you weren't selfish, you'd altruistically give all your money away to those who really need it. Therefore, since you continue to be selfish and greedy, the state should take your money off you and redistribute it to those who truly deserve it. Thus, unlike you, the socialist cares so much about the poor that they're willing to go to any lengths to help them, including stealing your wealth from you. Now, obviously there's a million reasons for why they're wrong, but it's done for altruistic reasons. And this is where I've had difficulty explaining to non-socialists the way that socialists think. My friend Axiom has never been a socialist, and couldn't understand why socialists were pro-tax. I had to explain to him that he, the evil capitalist, has got too much money, and that his wealth comes at the expense of other people who are, obviously on the street and starving. Therefore, they think that taxation will redistribute the wealth from the rich and give it to the poor, and that this is the right thing to do. Because, no person who has any morals could possibly argue against this, they think. And this is why it's impossible to get through to a socialist. Even I, as an ex-socialist, cannot get through to these people. They think that I've fallen for the devil. Capitalists, they say, are evil, selfish, and sinful creatures. We are the evil people, living devils. So of course they're not going to listen to us. When we're arguing with each other, they truly see you and me as an, absolute evil incarnate. That's why they call you all sorts of names. Nazi, fascist, racist, misogynist, and so on. Right? And why they don't listen to anything that you are saying. They don't accept a single point you bring up or accept any evidence you provide because they think you're trying to trick them. Or that you have been tricked and are in need of awakening, go woke. If only they could, if only you could see the truth, they think, of course you would pick socialism. Well, no. I am an ex-socialist for a reason. Socialism doesn't work. Altruism is immoral. And yet, they can't see it. And I haven't figured out a way to get through to them. I can't convince them that I'm not evil, or get them to actually listen to what I'm saying, or get them to take in the information being presented. I can't get them to understand. And honestly, this is a big reason why I'm burnt out. I just think, what's the point? The altruist morality that I still have from my socialist days says that I should help these people. And yet I can't. They won't listen. So I'm having to accept the grim reality that these people can't be helped, and that they must be left to rot in the gutter. Rather than help these people, I think, I may as well just look after myself and be selfish. And although that's against my nature, I have no choice, because it's driving me up the wall. And that's why I'm reading Ayn Rand. And all this is a difficult red pill truth to swallow. And just to round off this point, listen to this next comment I got from someone who thinks that altruism is the good morality system versus the supposed evil and sinful morality system of selfishness. Listen to the complete misunderstanding of what self-interest is actually about. This video is identical to the Nietzschean Randian Evolan polemic against religion only applied to communism as a religion. It's not too hard to find full rebuttals to those arguments, and I don't have the patience to make one here. I'd just like to point out one thing. The self-hatred Tik mentions as stemming from altruism is nothing more than the justified inadequacy one feels when they don't live up to moral principles. Any system of ethics, bar one, is going to create situations where people experience self-hatred, because that's called a conscience. Do what thou wilt is the only moral code which does not create self-hatred by default, because it's the only one that's virtuous. Indeed, the same criticisms of ethical principles Tik and his ideological forebears levy at altruism. People who want to overeat and abuse drugs and cheat on their partners levy at health standards and monogamy respectfully. The argument is the same because the goal is the same. A denial of virtue, whether in whole or in part. Striving for the ideals of virtue does not make a person blind to reality. Well, it does in this case. Far from it. It equips one to live in the Platonic world of forms, with all its cruelties, with dignity and satisfaction through self-immolation. The denial of altruism or any other virtue only ever leads to sickness and misery. So apparently, we just want to overeat. Obviously, abuse drugs, which I've never done, cheat on our partners, which I do all the time apparently, and live unvirtuously. I mean, it's complete nonsense. Not only has he no idea what our views are, but he is totally off the mark rather than the denial of altruism leading to sickness and misery, I'd argue that altruism is the cause of sickness and misery. Altruism is the denial of the self, therefore leading to self-hatred, low self-esteem, and a lack of self-confidence, and a lack of conscience. This manifests as a host of problems such as laziness, bipolar personality disorders, anxiety, depression, poverty, indebtedness, arrogance, malevolence, unearned pride in our spirituality, envy, wrath, the list goes on. But there's no way that I can possibly get through to this person. So I'm not even going to try. Instead, I'll limit my response to just 2 words. Stay ignorant. But this then leads to the criticism that I've gone down the Ayn Rand rabbit hole. Bearing in mind that I was a socialist who fell from the faith in 2019 and learnt actual economics, then only started reading Ayn Rand in the last few months or so. So to say that I've gone down the Ayn Rand rabbit hole is a bit much. I haven't actually read that much about her yet, and I came to the conclusion that altruism was bad before I read her. In fact, that's the reason I finally decided to start reading her. That and the fact that I read Leonard Peikoff's book, The Cause of Hitler's Germany, which is fantastic. I realised a while back that everything that my teachers had taught me was wrong. I realised that what the media told me, what society preaches, and what a lot of the culture I grew up in said was all wrong. The amount of times that I came across evidence and other truths that challenged and contradicted what I had been told gradually changed my view of the way that things were. And realising the truth that Hitler hadn't just put socialism in the name to trick the workers, that he was actually a socialist, caused me to lose the faith in socialism. And then, after taking the economic and political red pill, I then took the relationship red pill a couple of years later. And it's from these truths, and a lot of other further study and work, that I gradually realised that altruism was a major problem that I would have to overcome myself. And it was at that point that I picked up Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness. And I wish I had done so earlier. I wish I hadn't listened to the critics. They accused me of reading Mises and Rothbard and Ayn Rand when I hadn't. And then when I picked up Mises and Rothbard, I realised that, this is why they had told me not to read them. Well, the same thing applies with Ayn Rand. These critics have built their lives around lies, refusing to see past whatever the lamestream media tells them. Well, Ayn Rand drives a stake straight through the heart of this nonsense, exposing the lies for what they are. They don't like this, and so we see personal attacks against her. Hi Tik, just so you know, Rand practiced absolutely nothing that she preached. Nothing. Lived out her last days thanks to the altruism of others. Well, I hope you make a better objectivist than her. Easy on the declarations, Tiger. Had she earned the love and respect of others, or did she not work for it and expect it all the same? She was an anarcho-capitalist that ended up applying for social security. Tik will digest and explain that one, objectively of course. Rules for thee, but not for me. Well, no, Ayn Rand wasn't an anarcho-capitalist. The fact that you think she was an anarcho-capitalist is proof that you have zero idea of what you're talking about. Ayn Rand wasn't an ANCAP, and she wasn't a libertarian. So she can use the state services if she wants to, and that's not against her philosophy. In fact, that's why the ANCAPs disagree with her on this, because they think she wasn't being consistent. Which is an argument that I'm not wading into here. But this is why your argument makes no sense. You're assuming things about her that are not true, and you're doing so out of ignorance, based on what you've heard some moron say on Reddit, or maybe you've been listening to Jordan Peterson's take on Ayn Rand, which is also wrong. He doesn't understand her philosophy at all, yet claims he has read Atlas Shrugged several times, even though it's obvious that he hasn't. And it's clear that you haven't either. Ayn Rand also barely worked in her life and spent her last years in social housing on full government support. Well, again, this isn't a valid argument. But when pushed for further comment, he explains, in 1976 she retired from her newsletter and despite her lifelong objections to any government-run program, was enrolled in and subsequently claimed Social Security and Medicare government assistance with the aid of a social worker. And as one commenter replied, so she claimed money that she had paid for her entire life. It's ridiculous that you would think that was a violation of her moral principles. Integrity does not require that you passively take punches delivered at you because you are against punching and being punched. Later, someone else brings up another good point. A person paying taxes all their life, taking advantage of government assistance in old age, is not stealing. I would like to have a free market, but I'm not in a free market. I'm forced to pay taxes for things that I don't want nor need. I'm forced to pay for government potholes, forced to pay and therefore use a National Socialist health service, and I'm forced to pay for the Play-Dohs in Parliament and then spoil my ballots in the face of a non-existent choice at the polls. I don't want to have these things, but I have no choice. I have paid into the NHS and therefore will have to use the NHS. But I wish I had the freedom to spend my money on a different service. There's no contradiction there because in a free society, I'd absolutely put my money where my mouth is. We just don't live in a free society, and so I can't. And this common attack on Ayn Rand is the same. It just doesn't make any sense. If the government of Venezuela made petrol free, which they did at one point, you'd be stupid not to fill up your tank. Similarly, if the US government offers social security at a cheaper price than the market can due to the fact that they're stealing off the taxpayer, Ayn Rand would be wrong not to use that. But this doesn't mean she wouldn't have preferred a society where the government stayed out of the market. Yeah, this is the argument people make.
Ayn Rand's philosophy is the purest of all evils, and even surpasses National Socialism. So I wonder what your own psychological issues might be. My psychological issues lie in reading stupid comments like these. I agree, man. Ayn Rand's philosophy is that helping others is morally wrong, and you should be a self-centered rear end 24/7, worship the rich. It's not just libertarian, it's insane.
Ayn Rand wasn't a libertarian. She didn't like libertarians, and she didn't say it was morally wrong to help others. That is a blatant lie. She never said you should be a rear end who only worships the rich. This is all an ignorant and complete misunderstanding of what she was actually saying. And I've only just started reading her works, and I've not read that much about her yet. Yet, even a casual glance at her works will show you that what you're spouting here is a complete lie. And my question to you is, what are you scared of? Are you not capable of reading views that are contradictory to your own? Well, I know that you are, because you can't even listen to mine. If you think that having a strong sense of self and not letting others walk all over you and putting yourself first out of self-respect is surpassing the evils of National Socialism, you're a complete and utter moron. 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, and you think that a man pursuing his own happiness is worse than that. People then ask me why I've lost my faith in humanity. Well guys, it's because half the world's population are scumbags like these.
Tik used Ayn Rand's definition, which is why altruism is being cast in such a negative light, who was one of the most anti-altruistic people ever to live. In short, a dictionary should have been used to define altruism, not a political thinker who completely opposes the idea. Okay, let's use a dictionary. Altruism, noun, the unselfish regard for or devotion to the welfare of others, and behaviour by an animal that is not beneficial to or may be harmful to itself but that benefits others of its species. Yep, that's precisely the definition we're using. But apparently, people are incapable of recognising that I'm using the exact same definition. All altruism means is to do good without deliberate attention to self-interest. Takes it to an extreme. The general rule is that happy people do not become socialists. We all need something on this earth to believe in beyond ourselves.
Actually, as a socialist, I was very happy. Ignorance truly was bliss. I wasn't financially well off, and I wasn't perfectly happy, but I would say that I have become more unhappy since falling from socialism, and the reason why is because I see the reality of the world and haven't yet purged my altruistic morality from my system. So that clash between my altruistic morality and the reality of the world around me is making me unhappy. I can't change the world, but I can change myself, and that's what I'm in the process of doing.
Tik is using Ayn Rand's definition, someone who promoted that being selfish and putting your wants above anyone else's... The sentence is not complete. I am aware of that, and Ayn Rand's philosophy overall is angsty YouTube censorship anyway, but I still have to even attempt to pull him back into reality, even if he might completely ignore the whole comment.
Again, having been a socialist, and as someone still trying to purge the altruism in my system, I'm telling you that I didn't fall into Ayn Rand's philosophy first. I came to Ayn Rand only recently after realising that I needed help in purging altruism from me. I still haven't achieved that, but I want to, because I understand how devastating this evil ideology actually is to the individual and society as a whole.